Anyone who has had an unwell child feels that sense of fear and trepidation. When today's guest saw her child rushed into hospital and then start a journey to improve his health, she had to dig deep and educate herself. We will delve into the topic of diabetes in today's episode, how it shows up, what to look out for, and how my guest, a mother to her son Sebastian, has shown true resilience and strength. My guest today is Suzanne Gandy. Her career stems from the military, first as a captain in the Royal Logistic Corps, a fuel troop commander, and now as an HR leader in a highly prestigious organization, plus everything else that she's done in between. It is really inspiring to transform your life from one in the field to another, to get qualified, to build your skills, and to become a leader. It takes courage to be a mother who chooses to stay next to her son whilst he's in hospital and then change her life accordingly. Suzanne is a graduate from the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst with a degree in psychology and a master's in human resources, and she has a gold medal for Great Britain, a passionate sports person, and a doula. It's a journey that I'm sure others can learn from and be inspired by. When you think things get too much, you can break down the issue into parts and then address each one in turn. It's a bit like breaking the elephant down into chunks. To quote, "Life does not come with a manual, it comes with a mother." I am privileged to have Suzanne Gandy on the You Got This podcast today. It's wonderful to have you here, Suzanne.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And we're here in the UAE, in Dubai, an early morning recording. The first time we met, we were already in tears. We delved down into lots of different conversations. And I feel that when we resonate with another person, that energy, that conversation, that honesty comes through. So I'm really privileged to have you on the episode today. So thank you. Suzanne, let's go straight into this. So I've touched upon your career from the military and things like that. I'd love to hear more about it from your own words.
Well, to sort of go back to the fact that I really feel that I was quite privileged to have a decent education, which so many people in the world don't get. And I think that's the foundation for setting me up. Then obviously did my degree in psychology and had already been accepted to Royal Military Academy Sandhurst to join the British Army. And obviously we can touch upon the aspects of learnings from the time in the military. I did 2 tours of Iraq and then over time decided to take that leap of faith to completely change what I'd always wanted to do, which was be in the military, to something completely new. And so in my late 20s, I went through a complete career change, had to reskill, relearn, but also transfer a lot of the stuff that I'd learned from the military into the civilian life. And then we came out here to the UAE, and I had my son here. And I've never looked back, actually, since I've been here. I felt like the UAE has set me up to be able to pursue things I never actually dreamed of pursuing. I never thought I'd be able to do a master's, for example. And then obviously the career opportunities I've had as well here have been absolutely fantastic. And of course, life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs. And definitely my son, Sebastian, being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes was the biggest curveball of my life, I think. And I think taking all that learning from all those years, and also you touched on me being a doula, which is where you're a natural birth partner to somebody going through the process of having their baby, that I possibly have this unique set of skills, one from the very hard side of military training through to the much softer, attuned in side of the beauty of a woman going through the birthing process. And then perhaps I've taken all that and applied it to helping my son with his new life of living with diabetes, type 1 diabetes. So I think that's me in a nutshell, really.
Thanks for sharing that. You touched on like so many different elements. You talked about faith, you talked about reskilling and taking all of those different experiences. And like, how important is this notion of faith in your life, like in dealing with circumstances?
I think I'm not a religious person, but I have faith. And I think the two can be sort of separated. I truly believe that you have an inner power that many people don't realize they have. And when you feel you're at the bottom of the tank, you know, metaphorically speaking, there's always a reserve. There is always but it's keeping hold of the fact that things will work out, and that all you need to do is pursue knowledge and have faith that things will get better. And invariably they do. And I think that probably I would thank the military for that, is that they push you to the absolute limit, or what you thought was your limit. And then you find a whole new spare tank of fuel that you never realized you had, that you can call upon. And then that kind of sets you up, because that faith that you talk about, to me, it's split into the two parts of it's faith in yourself that you can get through something, but also faith in the fact that things will always, always get better.
That's really deep. It reminds me of the words, "This too shall pass."
Yes, absolutely. I've used that a lot. Yeah.
Beautiful. So when you look at your life today and like having transitioned into the corporate world, being a very successful person in the corporate industry as well, how did the military prepare you for that specifically?
I would say that the transition into the corporate world isn't perhaps as hard as people might think, especially because I'd worked previously in Civvy Street, as we call it, before joining the army. You know, I did a secretarial, course, and then I worked as a temp, worked in Office Angels back in the UK, and did a little bit of work. So I'd already had a flavor. But then also, when you're in the military, you're not always running around the countryside, either defending yourself or attacking someone else on an exercise. There is actually quite a lot of paperwork and administration, but most importantly, it's a human element. And let's not forget that the British military is not a conscript army. It is a military of, the army is an army of volunteers. They have chosen to pursue that career. And so it's very similar to life in the civilian world, where you have to motivate, you have to inspire, you have to give people direction and clear purpose. And serving out in more harsh environments, like, being on tour in Iraq, for example, that's a really great place to learn where leadership works and people who you thought might have leadership skills fail. Where you see where people really are resilient and where those people are in your team that need the extra help. And I think that's the same if you go into the corporate world. There are always going to be those people in your team that they just nail it. They just manage to do stuff so easily. They make it look so easy. And then there are people in your team who just need help. They just need that extra little bit of a lift or a little bit of a push. So I would say that the transfer wasn't as hard as people may think. But again, it goes back to just keep relying on yourself, that just keep learning, be open to all the new challenges. And also, you have to change. I would say I definitely had to pull back on some of my assertiveness. And that's probably maybe a combination of a number of things, having served in the military, but also being a female in the military. So you're somewhat in a minority and you are held to a higher standard, whether you like it or not. And so you do tend to push a little harder. And so I think that when I went into the corporate world where there's a lot more equality, that I definitely had to tone down that side of my character, and be more open to zipping this and zipping the mouth and opening the ears, and just learning.
It reminds me of another quote. Sorry, it might be a quote day today. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth and use it in that proportion.
Absolutely.
In terms of the things you spoke about, that assertiveness is almost that you have that sense of self-awareness that actually I need to tone things down. And one of the core elements of emotional intelligence is having self-awareness.
Yeah.
For example, when I moved to the UAE from London from a financial services background, quite, going all the way, going all the time, being quite assertive, that I had to change my approach when I moved to the Middle East. So again, it's where we go and what we bring with us. It's like shifting those things to adapt to the environment becomes really key.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I agree.
What are some of those pivotal moments in your life that's defined who you are today?
That is a very deep question for 8:30 in the morning. So let's try and answer it as succinctly as possible. I would say the realization that I'd achieved one of my ambitions in life by the age of 15 kind of set me off kilter for a bit, because I'd always wanted to be in the Great Britain team and win a gold medal, and then I did. And then I was like, but now what do I do? I was expecting to do that in my 20s, and then that would be my career, and I'd always be with horses. And okay, now I've got to change my direction. So that was a pivot moment. And that's when I started looking around beyond what I'd originally thought would be my life. And that's when I found the military. And so then I pursued that with sort of a focus through my late teens and into my 20s. And then, of course, I think there's definitely 2 types of people who join the military. There are the ones that join the military and they are there for life. And I have the most respect for people who can dedicate their life to that cause. And then there's people like me who perhaps found it somewhat difficult to reconcile elements of what the military does, and ultimately is just commanded by Parliament, by politicians. Difficult to reconcile that with my personal values. So there were some things that I found that, no, this is not for me. And that was another pivotal moment in my life where I thought, well, crikey, now I'd had this ambition that I would be in the military forever, and now this isn't working out how I thought it would be. Now I'm going to have to change. Now I'm going to have to learn. I'm going to have to find knowledge. I'm going to have to find a new path. And I found my new path. And then I would say, obviously, going through sort of that journey, not really any pivot moments until I'm there in the resuscitation room in Al Zahra Hospital, looking at my very frail son who is pretty much on death's door, and realizing, how did it come to this? How did it come to this, that I am a relatively educated, relatively intelligent person, and I missed all the signs of my son's type 1 diabetes, and I'm finding out he's got it now while he's surrounded by all these people that had muscled me out the way in a resuscitation room. And I would say that's the most recent pivot moment in my life, and probably the most dramatic. Yeah.
And I suppose there's people listening at the other end, and they maybe want to know a little bit more about, that how is he doing today and all of that, but where does the story go from that point?
So where the story goes from that awful realization in the resuscitation area, through the journey of him being in intensive care, then high dependency, then being moved to a specialist hospital, to day by day recovering, growing stronger, growing in size, height, muscle mass, to now being a 14-year-old boy who pretty much looks like an 18-year-old, getting on really well at school, and recently joining a rugby team, being massively into boxing, running around the neighborhood last night when it was Halloween, and living his life, having accommodated the fact that he's got type 1 diabetes. He can't do anything about that at the moment because there's no research on how will this end, how will there be a cure, whether pharmaceutical companies are very motivated to get a cure because it's big business. To it just being part of life now. And it is one of those things where when you get chucked a curveball, it's a case of, right, well, it can't define who he becomes. It should help him become somebody better. And already he calls his diabetes his superpower, because he's so much more attuned to what his body's doing. He can tell if his sugars are too high or too low, whereas the rest of us probably go through our day, doesn't even cross our minds what our sugar level's doing. But he'll go to me, Mum, I'm feeling a bit high right now. I'm feeling like my sugars are a bit high. Can you pass my sensor? And he wears a sensor on his arm. So we check his bloods, and almost always he's right. Likewise, when his bloods are going low, or I can see more easily when his bloods are going low in his demeanor, in his behavior. But, it hasn't stopped us doing crazy things like we went snorkeling in Zanzibar last year because I was like, right, come on, we can do this. Let's go and push the limits a little bit. Let's go to a country where there's not such access to medical care to see if we can do this. I know that we can do this. We go skiing together up mountains because it shouldn't stop him from doing anything. And I think the key is just to say, hey, this is part of what it is. The story is still in motion. The story continues.
Wonderful. And you use the word we a lot. So the impression I'm getting that it's a team effort. And how important is that to you?
I think the power of the team is something that has defined humanity as long as humanity has been, whether it's being in a tribe, hunting together, farming together, living together in more modern society, whether it's at work, in sports. Teams are really important. I think humans are naturally social animals. And in our life, we've got, the core team, which is obviously my son, our wonderful housekeeper and nanny, Mylen, who's just been an angel through the whole process. My neighbors, who are always there keeping an eye on things as well. My friends, my work colleagues, my boss. And then obviously my wider family, who unfortunately aren't here, but they give their team support from other countries. The team is really, really vital. My boy, he's not the center of the universe, don't get me wrong. He is part of the team. We all work together. We all have our needs. Okay, he has slightly more unique needs than the rest of us. But yeah, the power of the team is something that I just feel that oftentimes it's overlooked. Even doulaing, the team there is the medical professionals, the mum, the dad, the doula, the family members. Everything's a team. And that's where you can really, you can have a sense of safety, but also, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You've got that safety element, you've got the security element, but then you've also got that social element. And for Seb, my boy, you know, he can probably look after himself on his own now. Like, he goes on school trips on his own now. But even still, there's a team around him, the school teachers, his buddies. So yeah, everything's a team in our life, I think.
And I think often in organizations, maybe because of the culture, maybe because of the tone that's been set at the top, that it can become more competitive than collaborative. So in your role and like working within corporate organizations, like how important is this notion of leadership to then help drive like the right culture in a company?
I think leadership is critical. And I think it's a fine balance between having a highly performing, productive team to one where everyone's just a bit too complacent and there's almost too much harmony. So it's a fine balance. And I think the role modeling is the key. And that's another thing that I picked up from my training was just hold yourself to the highest possible standards as a leader. Excellence doesn't see gender. Just be excellent. Try and be your best in everything that you can be, because then it is a little bit of a magnet and it draws people along. And I think oftentimes over the years, I've seen it in corporate and in the military, those people who are called a leader by nature of their rank or their title at work often do not demonstrate good leadership skills, which I think is such a shame, because it's a privilege to be in a position of leading others, but you're not a leader if you don't have followers. So it boils down to that most basic fact. And in the criticality of leaders to setting the culture, I think, you look at all the research, you look at all the writings about culture, it all really does. It comes from the top, but also you've got to really think about what kind of culture you want in your organization and in your team, but then you've got to live and breathe it. And people say, oh, I've heard my friends and, say, oh, the culture at my organization sucks. People don't communicate, or it's too competitive, or all these sorts of things. And then I ask them what they're doing about it. And they're like, well, why is it my responsibility? So because when all the people go home, the culture goes with them. Right? The culture is the people. The culture is the way everyone interacts and behaves. And so everyone, whilst there is the criticality of there being a certain level of setting the scene from the leadership, it is every single employee has a responsibility for the culture. And if you're in an organization where you think, I don't like this culture, maybe take a look in the mirror first.
Completely agree with that. And it doesn't always need to be macro. It can start in an individual team, and that can create a domino effect. And I've seen it happen multiple times. So it's a choice, isn't it? And sometimes it's easier to keep things in the status quo than to say, I'm going to create a change in that as well. So Suzanne, obviously you work in the space of HR, and employees might go through tough times, something similar to you. There might be other things, mental well-being issues, financial issues. What role does an employer play when their employees go through tough times?
I think the employer can be that safety net for people when they're going through tough times. And I'll explain what I mean by that. That often when you're going, there is the tough times at work, right? And that's, invariably, targets or goals that need to be achieved, your KPIs. There's an element of control that you have on that. But when it's tough times like mental well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being, things that just the curveballs that happen in people's lives, often work can become that consistent element in the person's life. And so what role the organization can make or can have is that there is I'd say the formal structures that can be put in place, and then there is the informal side. So the formal structures that are in place and are things like at our work, okay, physical health, we have first aiders. Mental health, we have mental health first aiders at work. We talk about physical health and mental health an awful lot. Financial health is something we keep an eye on with our employees when people are asking for a lot of letters for different banks and things like that. Then we might have a little discussion. Then also there are the formal mechanisms such as, if you've got an issue, you should be able to go and speak to your line manager about it. But if you can't speak to your line manager about it, then go speak to your line manager's line manager about it. And if you can't speak to them about it, then fine, come and knock on the door of HR. We are there for people. So that's all the formal side. Paying people the value of their work, making sure that they have a healthy, safe environment to work in, making sure that there is joy at work, making sure that there is a vibrant environment, great colleagues, and most importantly, the opportunity to do really great work. These are all the things that employers can do that is on the formal side. The informal side, I always think, is the relationship the line manager has with the individual in their team. And this is where I feel either leaders tend to maybe fall behind or organizations don't do enough to help people who are given that privileged responsibility of leading others, to help them understand how important their actions and behavior and words are on their team, but also when their team members are going through tough times, to ensure that they are keeping a fair balance between what the organization needs and what the individual needs. And often, an individual will have already gone the extra mile for the organization. So sometimes that's when the organization should go the extra mile for the individual. But it has to be a little bit of a balance. And sometimes that can be a bit difficult because there are some managers who are naturally very empathetic and they can almost be too nice. So then you'll find employees, they cotton onto that real quick and they'll take advantage of that good nature of some line managers. And then you've got some line managers who are at the other end of the scale and maybe too hard and not attuned to the emotions and the well-being of their team members. And so when their team members really need the understanding of their line manager is not there for them. So that is possibly one of the most difficult things to do as a line manager, is to try and get that balance. So I think the employer has a huge responsibility, but line managers themselves have a huge responsibility. And I think oftentimes that is underestimated by line managers. They don't see it as their responsibility, but it is. We spend so much time with our colleagues at the end of the day. The discussions that I have with people, I only saw my kids for 1 hour last night before they had to go to bed. Yet they've been working with me all day. So I think that there is huge responsibility on the employer to help employees when they are going through those tougher times, as long as the balance is right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's creating that psychological safety. And like you're right, we spend 8 hours a day minimum at work. So then let's do the math, it's not rocket science that work is that core element of our lives. So it's like another family outside our own family. And that support mechanism becomes really important. And when you were going through the situation with Sebastian, how did your employer support you?
Well, everything happened. I think we ended up in the hospital at about 5 a.m. on a Monday morning. And obviously, that was probably a bit too early to be messaging my boss that I wasn't going to be coming into work. But I know he's an early riser. He gets up to pray. So I messaged him. And he messaged me back and he just said, focus on your son, take as much time as you need. And that to me immediately gave me the sense of comfort that now I could focus on my boy. And I didn't have that concern in the back of my mind about work. And then obviously those first couple of days were very touch and go with Bastian and whether he was going to recover or not. And then if he did start to recover, what long-term impact such a high level of diabetic ketoacidosis had on his internal organs, we didn't know. And so I probably spent more time in those early days researching type 1 diabetes. But then gradually I felt like I got a knowledge level and I felt like things were moving in the right direction. And then I felt like I could start filling in the gaps of time with work. And actually, that was quite nice because it took my mind away from what was quite a dramatic and stressful and emotionally draining situation. My team were great as well. They were so helpful. They just covered for me, basically. And then after a few days when Bastian had to, he'd stabilized and they had to move him to a specialist hospital. And we moved there and then Sebastian just got stronger and stronger each day. And I was, people put in, I'm WFH on message, I'm working from home. Mine was WFH, I'm working from hospital. I got a surprisingly good amount of work done, actually, because Bastian was mostly in and out of consciousness and just sleeping a lot. So I was cracking on with things. And then I get a message from my boss saying, which hospital are you guys in? And so I told him where we were. And he said, are you allowed visitors? I was like, yes, of course. And next thing I know, my CEO, who is the leader of a billion-dollar organization, turns up at my son's hospital bedroom and to come and check on him and me to make sure that we're doing okay. And like that was really, really meaningful. That was a really meaningful and impactful thing to do. And it's something that I've learned from, that now if any of my team are ever in that situation, I would absolutely, and God forbid that they're not, but I would absolutely do the same. Because that's when words transition into action, and then you actually believe and you trust that, yeah, okay, this person has got my back in this situation. It is the safety net for me. And when I go back to work, I'm going to work a bit hard. I'm going to work even harder than I was working already, because that meant so much. And it's those little things that can ultimately lead to higher performance in an organization. And I know that's not why he did it, but from a psychological standpoint, you then have a true relationship with your place at work. And I think it just brings out the best in you after.
That's leadership, essentially, isn't it? Like holistic leadership, so to speak.
Definitely.
Oh, thank you. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And hats off to the CEO.
Yeah.
A wonderful thing to do. Suzanne, like as we approach World Diabetes Day, there's going to be people listening to our podcast, a lot, I hope. And they may be looking at their son or daughter and be thinking, oh, Suzanne spoke about this or that, and it's maybe triggering something in me. So, like, what are some of these things in terms of tips or key things to look out for that parents can do?
So, type 1 diabetes is something that I was completely ignorant to. I knew that there was two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. And I knew that type 2 was kind of like more of a lifestyle diabetes, where maybe you were consuming too much of whatever, I didn't even know what, that led to your body not being able to cope. And then you would have to take medication and things like that. And then there might be other complications associated with having diabetes. So I didn't really know any more about type 1 apart from a friend of mine when I was a kid had it, and she'd ended up in a coma. And when we used to go out together, she always carried, some stuff with her, like an injection stuff and, some sweet stuff. I think in those days it was probably a can of Coke and a Mars bar, which is not advisable these days. A juice and raisins is what's advisable these days, right? But I had no idea, right? And it wasn't until after my son had started to recover, and I'm back in that situation talking to the team that we were talking about earlier, friends, family, and we all started going through what all the signs and symptoms are of type 1 diabetes. And we pretty much could check them all off the list as signs that we'd seen in my son Sebastian, but we'd all missed. We'd all missed it. And so let me take you through the kind of the list of stuff that we missed and the guilt that you get as a mum of, having your own child end up in a resuscitation room because you've missed all the signs and symptoms of something that you were so ignorant to. It will always be something that I carry with me. So the first thing I noticed was he was losing weight, but also he was 11. So he was going through that kind of stage that kids go through where they start elongating out. So I just thought, like, I was a skinny kid. So I'm thinking maybe he has my genetics and that he's a skinny kid and that he'll fill out later because he was eating really high amounts of food, right? So he's eating the food, but he's getting what I thought elongating. And what that is happening is that he is eating food, the glucose was going into his body, but because type 1 diabetes is when your cells that create insulin in your pancreas have come under attack, they're no longer working, that you can eat whatever you damn well like. That is not going to get transferred into energy into your cells. So naturally, your body almost starts eating away at itself. That's why when you see these awful pictures of children before they found insulin, before that a miraculous discovery was made, they're like walking skeletons. So first off, he was losing weight. But I thought, well, he's eating. And, we joke, that he's got a man's appetite, but he's got like a little skinny boy's body. And of course, we didn't know anything different. The second thing was he was going to the toilet a lot. And that's the whole getting up to pee. And a lot of people go, oh, yeah, sign of diabetes is you get up to go pee. But no one tells you why you're getting up to go pee. And it's because you've got all that glucose that's not going anywhere. So it's in your blood and it's kind of poisoning your blood. Plus the fact that then you're getting into a space of ketoacidosis because your body's not getting what it needs. So it's eating away at itself. That's a bit of a toxic mix in your blood. So your body goes, whoa, I need to dilute this. So you get thirsty. So you start drinking more water to try and cleanse and dilute everything out of your blood. And of course, then you need to go to the toilet more. That's why that's why a sign of diabetes is drinking a lot. It's because you've got a toxic mix building up in your blood. That's ultimately the main reason why Bastien ended up in the resus area, is because his toxicity level of his blood had got to the point where he was being poisoned. So, of course, another one that's not on the medical list, but just one that I found maybe because we're living here in Dubai, was ants. Ants in his bathroom. Nature was even trying to tell me. We kept getting ants in his bathroom. Not in my bathroom, not in our nanny's bathroom, just in Sebastian's bathroom. And why is that? Because all that glucose, he's peeing it out. It's attracting nature. It's attracting ants. And it was just, we're scratching our heads. Why is his bathroom? What's he got in it? Like, has he taken food up to his bathroom? Like, what is going on here? And then another thing was he was saying that his eyes hurt. And of course, when you've got high blood sugar levels, it does impact your eyesight. His concentration wasn't as good as it could have been. Moody. again, like I think, well, he's an 11-year-old boy, he's moving into being a teenager. Of course he's going to be moody. Of course he's not going to concentrate. The impact of social media. We'd been through COVID, that whole electronics rules had gone out the window, all those sorts of things. So we just dismissed everything. We dismissed everything. And then you can imagine that I'm on my phone. He's on a number of different, he's hooked up to so many drips in his hands, in his feet, just trying to cleanse and bring down the acidity level of his body. And I'm there on my phone trying to work out, what is this type 1 diabetes that the doctors are telling me that my son's got? And it comes up with all the signs and symptoms. And I remember being there in the hospital hallway in the emergency department because I'd got chucked out the resus area. I was told he's going to be all right. Just we wait. I was like, okay, so I wait. I'm on my phone and I'm looking at all the signs and symptoms, and like that stone of weight starts dropping into the pit of your stomach, where you realize, oh my God, all these signs and symptoms were there, but I just discounted everything. And then what I did is I started looking back at my phone of the photographs we'd taken that weekend, because we'd been at a water park when he got sick. He started throwing up. And when we got him home, he started having throwing up and diarrhea. So I thought he'd picked something up from the water park, another thing I dismissed. Then the final sign that made me realize as a mother, this is a hospital now situation, was his breathing. So he's been throwing up, he's had diarrhea. Well, kids get that. We get that. We pick stuff up. I thought he picked it up from the water park. But then when I looked at him and he was breathing really shallow but really fast, that's like the final signs of you're in massive, massive danger, because that is your body trying to get rid of acidity from everywhere. It's got acidity from your stomach lining, from your bowels, from your lungs. Like your body is I'm in the final stages here. Help me. This is like as many signs as I can give you. And that's the point where I was like, we need to take him to the hospital now. Thanks God we did. Because when I said to the doctor the following day, when Seb was, all the blood and all the markers were moving in a positive direction, but we still didn't know whether there would be long-term impact from what happened. I said, how close were we, doctor? And he said, probably had another 40 minutes. I was like, wow, that was too much. But I'm there in that hospital hallway, looking at all the signs and symptoms. And I thought, gosh, if only I'd known. I'd looked at those photos. He was so skinny that weekend. I looked at photos about 6 months before. He wasn't skinny. He's slim, but he's not skinny. But then I think the biggest thing for me was the improvement, the speed of improvement, that once he was getting insulin and eating, the way he has just filled out and grown in height, grown in stature, grown in character, grown in as a beautiful human being. It's just miraculous, but all down to those cells in his pancreas that one day decided to stop making insulin, and we just didn't know. So now he has about five injections a day, one before breakfast, one before lunch, one before dinner. You have to calculate how many carbs or what's the weight of carbs that he's going to eat. Then you have to give the amount of insulin to be able to process those carbs so that can actually be turned into energy. And then he has a nighttime injection that keeps his metabolism and his sugars level overnight. And then he might have the odd injection through the day when, if there's a birthday party and they're going to eat cake, I would never tell him not to eat it. I'd say, absolutely, go ahead. He's not really into sugary stuff anyway, but we'll just do a correction if needs be. And that's our new normal, is having more insulin having the insulin in the house, but also we had to put sugary stuff into the house because we didn't really have anything there. So now we've got juices and raisins and emergency stuff in the house. And that's our new life. That's how we live now. So, yeah, if parents are out there and they see that their child is maybe going to the toilet, they hear them in the night, just go get them checked. If they see that their child might be losing weight, don't discount it like I did, that they're just growing. Like, if you can start seeing their bones, if their spine, like I could with my son, okay, that's not okay. Go get your kid checked. If they have fruity breath is another thing. I didn't recall that was said, but that's another sign and symptom, fruity breath. But if you see any of those other things in your child or even in people around you, because it's not just children who come down with type 1 diabetes, there's points of, there used to be called adolescent diabetes, but you can also get diagnosed in your 20s, in your 30s, even in your 40s. So, spread the word about what the signs and symptoms are, and just go get a simple check at the doctor's. Simple as that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this honest, insight into that experience and being vulnerable with the audience and me today as well. I really appreciate you giving that account, because there might be people out there having a situation like this, but maybe something similar, like a health scare. And what you've shown is, when you've spoken about all this experience, the power of the team, educating yourself, being there at the time, having the right people around you, it shows that we can, create a new version of, like what you've said, a new normal, and life can thrive, and we can, go forward with a new perspective. And like you've said, he's thriving, he's doing really well, and I'm so happy to hear that. And hats off to you and the whole family for getting to that stage.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, when it comes down to when your child gets so sick, but then knowing that actually they're never going to get better, that it's difficult for a parent. But I think also what's always been in my mind is that Seb has to have the support he needs to be able to reconcile this in his own head. And there was a point that we went through after his diagnosis was that he thought if he'd fall asleep, he would die. Right? He had this fear that if he fell asleep, he would die. And it would take a long time for me to help him get settled at night. And I knew that was beyond my capability. So that's when I called upon professionals to help Seb with that anxiety about what had happened to him, that traumatic experience, but also now the fact that he lives with this horrible shadow that if his blood sugar levels go too high, he'll end up in ketoacidosis again like he was before. But if his blood sugar levels go too low, he can end up in seizure, coma, and death. And both ends of the spectrum, unfortunately, is death. And so he lives with this shadow more than the rest of us, this knowledge of his own mortality. And to me, that was a point where it was beyond my capability. So I did call upon professional help to help him with it. And I think that's also something that parents should understand, is that whilst it's difficult for us to see this happening to our children, it's the children that are finding it really difficult. And we have a level of capability as parents, but we also need to know our limits. And that's when we should call upon professional help. And it's been astounding, the help that we've had. And we're so lucky to be in a country where we can get that. And sometimes, it's a thought that often crosses my mind. So why my boy? Why my boy? And I often reconcile it in my head in the fact that this has happened to my boy. I know I am capable to look after him. I'm in a place where we can look after him. So maybe that's one less child who's not in that situation that will get diabetes, because my boy's the statistic that did get it.
Profound. Suzanne, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today's episode of the You Got This podcast. If people want to look you up, how can they connect with you or find out more about you?
Me, I have Instagram. I'm pretty rubbish at social media, to be honest, but you can always contact me through Instagram. It's my name, Suzanne Gandy. It's really simple. Just send me a message, especially if a parent has just had their child diagnosed with type 1 and they're going through that pain, then you're not alone. There is a whole community of us type 1 mums, and we're our own little family, our own team of support. So just reach out to me and be welcomed into our family, into our team, and get the team support that you need to get through this painful process until you get into your space of your new normal.
Awesome, thank you. And we'll share the details
for
people to connect with you as well. Suzanne Gandy and Bastian, you've both got this. So thank you for being here today. And to my audience, thank you for listening. If there's anything on this episode that resonates with you or you want to find out more, please reach out to me. And remember, you've got this.